Hello, 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 y'all. I am fortunate enough to be here today with Carlos, but I'm not going to steal his thunder. Carlos, Señor Hidalgo, who are you and what the heck are you doing here today?
Yeah, Ryan, thanks for having me. As for who I am a man of faith. I've been married to an amazing woman for just about 30 years. We've been together for 32. I have four amazing kids, all grown and gone. A fantastic daughter-in-law, live in upstate New York in a real remote town, and I just happen to run a growth consultancy firm called Digital Exhaust and been in B2B marketing and sales for about 30 years.
And where does speaking play into all that? Because obviously, if you're here, there's something in your world that
Yeah.
has to do with speaking.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to speak globally, and it's something that I love to do. It's part of our business. I was just in Spain in February delivering a keynote to a marketing organization. And so I've also been able to do a TEDx. And so it's just part of what I do. It's part of something that I have done for the last 20 years and really, really enjoy it. And I think it's God's redeeming way of letting me be the center of attention for 45 minutes.
And is the speaking you do now currently, is it, so the target audience of this podcast here is aspiring speakers, professional speakers, and entrepreneurs who speak to your business. It sounds like the speaking gig you just did in Spain was kind of for that third one I mentioned, the entrepreneur who speaks to grow their business. Was that almost like a lead generation type thing, or was it a marketing thing for your business, or how did it kind of fit in?
Yeah, it was a paid engagement to go deliver a keynote for a marketing kickoff for a global organization. I do a lot of speaking to help generate leads as well at conferences. And I've had the opportunity to be paid to speak across the globe, deliver keynotes at marketing conferences. So it's part of our business. It's part of what we offer. We do everything from training, workshops, all the way into the keynotes that I mentioned.
And that kind of process, right? If you use it as lead gen, there's the people sitting in the audience, and then there's you on stage and the value you're providing. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of bring the two together to turn those leads into clients after you get off stage? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you what I used to do. I used to give the whole, let me tell you about us and who we are. And I realized nobody cares. So I leave that part out. What I try to do is educate my audience on what I know we do for our clients. And it's a fine line because I don't really talk about our services. I don't talk about our solutions. I don't talk about everything that we do. But whatever topic I am speaking about, I talk about what we've done for our clients. I will bring client case studies to bear. And then I'll show a lot of our models and methodologies to drive home that point. Then at the end, what I'll do is say, hey, if you want access to this presentation, find me after we're done. So I usually stay up front, hand me your card or make sure we're connected on LinkedIn, and I will send you this presentation. Now I've got their contact details. I'm able to start a dialogue. I'm able to engage with them. And not everyone turns into a bona fide lead, but there's a good number who want to have a discussion after. And then typically what I've done probably over the last 2 to 3 years is at the end, I put a QR code and say, hey, if you would like to have a conversation about this and how it applies to your organization, just book some time with me. So it's a link to my calendar where they can book 45 minutes and we spend time talking. I learn a lot about them. They learn more about me. And it's just another way to really help drive home that discussion and help them get more out of the presentation that they were just a part of.
Okay. And so a lot of speakers I've talked to that are kind of similar to you in the sense of entrepreneurs who speak to grow their business, they normally talk about two different kinds of monetization of speaking gigs. There's the paid gig, and then there's the back end sale gig is what they've called it. It sounds like you're figuring out a way to do both at the same time. How does that normally work out?
Yeah, it works pretty well. I mean, it's you got to go in to say, what is really the goal of what I'm trying to accomplish here? What have I been brought in to do? So for instance, the one I referenced in Spain, the paid gig, I didn't go in with this idea of, I'm going to now land this company as a client. Everybody in that room, the 200 people in the room, were all with the same company. So I've had some ongoing dialogue with some of the executives, but nothing's landed yet. And so I have to understand that they're just not at that point. I think there's an opportunity there, but it's going to be a slower burn. If I'm at a conference, now I've got anywhere from 200 to 500 captive marketers, all representing different companies. Whether that conference pays me or not, it's still an opportunity for me to speak to what I believe their pain points and challenges are, how I think they should go about, fixing those issues and addressing those challenges. And it just so happens that we offer some of those services that will help them. And if I can find, a handful of those folks who want to hire us after the fact, then it's, I get paid for it and I'm making the sale on the back end. So it's a real benefit. And some of them, quite honestly, especially some conferences that I have a long history with, I do simply for a nominal fee because we have that relationship and they were part of what helped me establish my career as a speaker.
It sounds like you kind of got, I don't know if this is a term or not, but it just makes sense to me, like an hourglass sales funnel where on one side you have people coming in, you are the product, and they're coming in, booking you to speak at the event. And then you speak at the event, and then the people end up kind of coming into your company after and monetizing on that end. How does this event planner find you? And what does the kind of top of that hourglass sales funnel look like for you? How do they find you? How do they book you at a gig? And then what did you have to do to kind of get to that point where it's just warm inbound? If it is just warm inbound, I don't actually know. I'm just assuming.
Yeah, some of it is. And it's not like I've got this, diary jam packed with all these speaking engagements. COVID, of course, put a big kibosh on that. And so because of just the way I manage things, I've really been probably in the last 9 months doubling down on trying to ramp that speaking piece back up, which was pretty vibrant. And it was about 25% of my income leading up to COVID. But to your question, I do work with one speaker's agency, Harry Walker out of New York City. That's the one who found me for the Spain event. There's other opportunities that I have, and I'm pretty prolific on LinkedIn as well. I try to post a number of times a day about different things, different thoughts. Anytime I do speak, I post that I have spoken at some event, and I'll put a picture or I'll put a video or a snippet. And then I do a lot of webinars as well, which is obviously virtual, but it gives you an opportunity to showcase how you can present, how you process thought, your pacing, your public speaking ability. And so all of those things kind of come together as a multi-channel way for individuals or event planners to find me and say, hey, we'd like you to come speak at our event.
Some people I think are born very extroverted and it comes easy to them and it lights them up. But I also know that public speaking is globally feared more than death. So there's a lot of time, someone might have an amazing story, amazing idea, amazing value to provide, but there's this kind of invisible barrier. It's invisible, but to them it's huge. This giant concrete block that they can't break through because speaking's so scary. So how did you kind of initially go from having all this value inside you to kind of making that jump over or through that barrier that was there?
Yeah, I was a communications major in college. Not that really got me anything. It just was what I thought an easy major, and I liked communications, so I went for it. I was on the debate team for 2 years, and that was really where I didn't know it at the time, but I realized how that shaped my style of speaking because it caused you to have to think quickly, have to respond, taught me how to do a lot of research, which was great. But I never left college thinking I'm going to go be a public speaker. So my first opportunity to do any kind of public speaking was at a conference when I was with McAfee, thinking this would be a great way to maybe get my name out there in the industry, another step in my career. They accepted, and I was awful. I went to the conference, I spoke. Someone had given me this advice of, start with a joke. So I created this top 10 list. I think about it now and I'm like, I really hope there's not a video of it somewhere, but part of me kind of does because I'd like to see it. But I just kept going. And what I started to do was I started studying those people that I really admired, how they spoke, how they presented. And I'd first listen for the content, and then I'd watch again if it was on tape to kind of see how they paced themselves. I talked to a lot of individuals who did speaking, and then I just kept going at it. I kept putting myself out there. And I finally was able to, I would say probably a little more than a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago, get comfortable with my style, with how I prepare, which is a little unique when I talk to other speakers, but it fits me. And it's really helped me feel comfortable on stage and be very well prepared for whatever audience I'm going into.
Can you share that? The strategy that you use to prepare?
Yeah, I'm one where it's like a presentation or, the TEDx was different. I wasn't looking for that opportunity. Fortunately, it came to me. And I really spent a lot of time crafting what I wanted to say, but with all of my speeches, it has to make sense up here for me first. So it's almost like I almost have a mental slide deck that I go through, or a mental outline before I put anything on paper. And then what I do is I just kind of data dump. Whether it's a PowerPoint or whether it's a memorized speech, I just write stream of consciousness. For some of my conferences, or like the corporate event that I did, I do a lot of research. So I know what I want to say. So I do a lot of Googling. I have an archive of research that I will go reference. And that's probably the only time where I have any kind of photographic memory, because I'll read a piece of research and I can remember. And then I start pulling that in. And so if you were to look at it at the beginning, it would look like a hodgepodge where you're like, this makes no sense. And then I'm able to then start to walk through and cut, bring some more in, rearrange. And then I say, okay. And then I walk through the presentation, not in a way where I'm going to present it, but I want to know the contents of the slide. In the terms of a TEDx, I practiced that speech quite a bit and became comfortable with it, but I didn't get so married to, I have to get every word down. I knew the general flow, and then I go on stage. I don't rehearse. I used to. I don't, because it throws me off. And what I like to do is really play off the audience, or if there was a speaker before me, I like to bring in some of their stuff. So this is where my ADD really does help. It allows me to think quickly, respond, and then also respond to questions, which is something I'll do at a conference or in a corporate event. I'll take questions as I'm going through to help keep the audience more engaged.
You mentioned a few times your TEDx talk. You're also an entrepreneur who speaks to grow their business. Where did the TEDx fit into kind of your bucket list, your life goals, your business, and kind of how did you go about the decision to even do one in the first place? Because they're free. You don't get paid anything for it. As a business person, as an entrepreneur, normally you have to see an ROI in an action you do, or a tangible output. And that's the kind of tough thing with TEDx talks, is normally there's not always a tangible output. I've interviewed 30 different TEDx speakers with my business partner, and we found that 8 out of 10 TEDx speakers saw zero change in their life before and after giving their TEDx talk. Those 8 out of 10, we thought, okay, what's different, these 8 out of 10 versus these 2 out of 10? And the 8 out of 10 thought that TEDx talk would just be like pushing a button and magically becoming a super famous Brene Brown, Simon Sinek 50K speaking gig and automatically have a multi-million-dollar business. That's not what happens. Those 2 out of 10 that made the difference, they were strategic with it. They figured, okay, I have this goal. How does this gem of a marketing asset fit into my path to this goal? And what systems on the back end do I have to set up surrounding the exposure, the visibility, the credibility of my TEDx talk to leverage to help achieve this goal? So for you, how did it go about fitting into everything you were doing at the time? And then when did you give it? It was a while ago, right?
Yeah, I believe it was 2018, which that's really hard to believe. So at that point, I was in the process of writing a book called The Un-American Dream, which is a lot of my story, how I kind of sold out for the growth of my business, made work everything in my life, and started to notice that I wasn't the only one, that this was kind of an epidemic that we have in the Western culture in which we live. And so I had started just posting a lot on LinkedIn about defining work boundaries and why is work and life the only two things we try to separate. And I started to get a lot of traction from that, which I was pleasantly surprised with. And so what I started to do is use LinkedIn as a way to vet potential chapters of the book. So I'd put some content, some posts out there. And depending on the engagement, depending on the uptake from my followers, I thought, okay, this is a good opportunity. From that, I forget what the post was, but I had a colleague of mine, a good friend in Atlanta. She called me one day, I think it was a Saturday, and said, hey, I want to let you know I read your post and I'm on the committee for the TEDx Centennial Park Women, and I've nominated you to speak at our next gathering, which I didn't go looking for it. And I was pleasantly surprised. And I said, oh, well, I really appreciate that. She said, I'll keep you posted. I think it was about 3-4 weeks later that I was informed that they accepted it. And for me, it was a challenge, because usually you have some slideware to help keep you on pace. This was something 15 minutes total memorized speech that I had to give. And I knew it would help from the book's perspective. Clearly, I'm not a Brene Brown or a Simon Sinek, but it definitely did help bring that together with the book. And then I used the TEDx as part of the book marketing, which was beneficial as well. And it is something that I still point to in terms of what I've been able to do. It gives people a good idea of my stage presence and that I actually can present and, at the risk of sounding arrogant, a pretty good speaker. So it is something that I use in my own marketing in terms of how I speak and what I can speak on, because it had nothing to do with marketing. It had everything to do about how do we live our best life and get the most out of it.
So you bring up something really interesting that a lot of people I talk to and TEDx organizers as well kind of talk about this, where the idea we're spreading, if it comes directly from a book you've published already, it's an idea that's already been spread and is therefore no longer an idea worth spreading. So how did you tactically go about leveraging your TEDx talk to market the book? And then was the publishing prior or after giving your TEDx talk?
The publishing was after, and it was actually a little intimidating. I was speaking to 450 women about how to balance your work and your life. So that in and of itself, and what you don't see on the recording was the setup from the MC who said, is it work-life boundaries, balance, harmony? She said, well, apparently there's a man who's going to tell us how it is. So it was like, oh, I'm going in a lion's den here. Thankfully, they were all very gracious. But the book came after. What I was able to do was kind of synthesize some of my thoughts around the topic. How do you set boundaries in your life to bring the best of yourself to each part of the life? And work is just one of them. I don't believe in work-life balance. I think we have 168 hours. What we do with it includes work and a whole lot else. And so we better figure that out. So it allowed me to kind of bring some of those thoughts to the table and see if it resonated. And once I knew that it did with my audience, pretty big audience of 450 folks, then I thought, okay, I really am onto something and I can infuse this into the book. And then luckily for me, my copy editor flew down and attended the talk as well. So she was able to get a lot of insight into what I was thinking, which really helped shape how the book came out.
That's interesting. So would you say the content of your talk similar to the LinkedIn kind of instantaneous feedback of like market study? If the content of the book would be good, you get instant feedback. Was the TEDx talk kind of just a more expanded version of that to build your book?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, if it had been a resounding thud, I would have had to rethink the book. Right. But it was another, I'm going to use the word experiment. It really was helpful in getting some qualitative feedback on the topic to see if it resonated with professionals. And between what I saw on LinkedIn, some of the urging I got from colleagues, and then that speech, it definitely resonated. And so it was, at that point, it was kind of, I'll focus on the book and let's get it out and let's get it to market. And it released in June of 2019.
So what I think is super interesting about this kind of more macro, it might not actually be macro because it was only a few years, but in your case, this segment was, you started on the LinkedIn, just kind of poking and prodding, seeing what was hitting and what was working. Your experimenting on the LinkedIn led to your TEDx talk, both of which validated your book concept. You wrote the book, published the book. How did you leverage the credibility of being an author, a published author, and having that book out there? What was, you kind of like made like a pyramid, like a ladder of credibility, a credibility stack. How did you leverage that book to get to that next level? And what did that next level actually look like?
Yeah, the book opened a lot of doors for speaking. Was able to present in Australia on the topic. That conference, I think, bought a slew of books. That was all beneficial. And I didn't use a publisher for this one, so that helped dramatically. I flew all over the country. I was asked to be on numerous podcasts, numerous webinars to promote the topic, to promote the book. Actually, the corporate event I referenced in Spain in February, I did a Q&A with one of their co-CMOs, and she actually, during the Q&A, brought up my book and the topic and everything. So it still resonates. I still get a lot of questions about it. I still get inquiries regarding it. So up until the 2 years that followed, I had a tremendous opportunity to go and speak, which was a little bit more dialed in. It allowed me to bring in some of the latest research post 2019 about that. And then interestingly enough, it also got me a contract to produce content for a brand for a year, because I would reference the book in some of the videos that I then used to promote the book on LinkedIn. So it really opened a lot of doors for me, and I met some incredible people and was able to get paid for it.
And so leveraging the book to get more exposure, more speaking gigs. I was talking to I would call him a thought leader. His name's David Meltzer. And he was talking about how for him, it doesn't matter the stage he speaks on. It matters that he can capture the content of him speaking on stage to then leverage on his socials, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever next one comes out, which then brings people into his community, book sales, and it just kind of feeds the beast, so to speak. So for you, how did you leverage the perceived credibility and authority of content of you speaking on stages to then get to the next level after that? Or did that kind of funnel back into the machine, book sales, more speaking gigs, content of you speaking, more content, more community, and it just kind of like grew naturally at that point? Or what did that kind of path look like?
Yeah, it kind of grew organically a little bit. I would have, I'd get a call from someone I never spoke to that said, hey, I so-and-so shared your TEDx with me. I saw you speak. We have this opportunity. Are you interested? And so we'd have that conversation. And then anytime I spoke, especially in the 2 years post the release of the book, part of what we would negotiate is, hey, every attendee should get a copy of the book. I would do a book signing. So you try to make that as much as your marketing as possible and bring that with you to any event that you're going to be speaking on, especially if it's the contents of that book. One of the decisions I've made, just because I find it exhausting, is I'm not a social media person. I used to be on LinkedIn, on Instagram. Oh, I'm still on LinkedIn, but really active on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. And I just found it exhausting. And I found it, quite honestly, social media is such a cesspool. And I know that I should be out there and doing all these things. Maybe I'm getting too old and I'm that curmudgeon right now, but I've just decided LinkedIn is going to be my platform of choice. I do have the other platforms. I'm just not very active on it. And, maybe this is a good conversation to say, all right, I probably need to get a little bit more active, start some pages so I can ramp this thing back up if this is really what I want to do going forward.
It's interesting you mentioned that. Do you know who Alex Hormozi or Dean Graziosi is?
Maybe. I know the second name.
Okay. So this guy, Alex Hormozi, he's very prolific on socials and YouTube and podcasting now. And he was growing and scaling gyms, and he helped gyms launch, grow, and scale, get full with members. And he went to his mentor, Dean. In his head, he wanted to be like the silent, the sneaky rich, like really successful, but totally anonymous, right? And like have security with the privacy that he had. And he talked to his mentor, Dean, who was all over socials, and asked him, how did you make the decision to kind of take that leap into going in socials? Because you get haters, you get stalkers, you get dangerous messages sometimes too, and you're in public eye. And he said, if all I have to deal with is a few stalkers, a few haters, and some kind of things, the output of the people that I'm put here on this planet to impact, I would easily take that sacrifice of a few hate messages a day, a month, whatever it was, in order to reach those people that my message is destined and meant to reach. And so for him, it was like kind of looking at like weighing it. And for him, he was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. If that's, a cost to get to that next level, I'm willing to pay that cost. And that impacted me a lot as well when I was super scared of going into socials and all that kind of stuff. So intimidating. And at the point I had the same perspective of you, like, this is a cesspool. And I thought it was disgusting that, like, we always use the term Instagram feed or your social media feed. And I was like, if you are what you eat and you want to have a healthy nutrition, isn't that the same thing that and you go to the grocery store, you pick out what you want to eat. Whereas on Instagram, if you're just kind of following a bunch of stuff, you're letting other people control your feed and what you're getting put in. I was like, that's so dangerous that I think about it. And then I just kind of structured my feed to make sure I wasn't getting any cesspool type stuff in. And that's kind of how I validated it to myself to actually get into it. What does your next level look like? You've got the book, you've got the TEDx talk, you're obviously going on podcasts, you're flying internationally to Spain. Which part of Spain was it in?
Madrid.
Cool. Which part?
Right near the airport. I literally flew in, took a car to the hotel, worked, went for a 2-mile walk to wake up, flew back, spoke, and flew home the next day. So hardly any time. And that's what most business travel, I'm sure you know this too. People are, oh, you've been there. I'm like, yeah, I think I'd been to London 20 times before I actually went as a tourist and got to actually see how great the city is. So yeah, I mean, I was thrilled. An amazing group of people, loved it. We had a blast, so much fun. For me, I turn 53 next month. I think more about retirement and what does that look like. I don't think I could ever just golf 3 days a week and fish the next 4. I don't want my brain to turn to mush. For me, what I really want to do is say, what is it? What does my platform need to be? And I've got a million different ideas. I love marketing. It's been a great career, but do I want to speak about that for the rest of my life? Probably not. I've made enough mistakes. I think I can help people, business owners, folks like that. So I'm still in the process of formulating what all that looks like and what I want to speak about, what would really get me charged up, because it's not just going on stage. And for those who are listening, who are aspiring speaker, there is so much work that has to happen before you ever step foot on stage and turn your microphone on to make sure you are prepared, down to understanding who the audience is. What is the average age? What are their challenges? And so, especially when I'm hired to speak, I like to get all of that information. And then, are they more conservative? Are they, what's the history of their company? All of these types of things. So I put a lot into it. And I learned that from a lot of good speakers is there's quite a few hours. So to do that, I've got to be able to enjoy that piece. And so I'm still trying to formulate, what do I want my next 20 years of speaking to look like? What do I want to be known for? And that's probably when I'll hop back on to social media, because I'm not afraid of the haters. I had it when the book came out. I had people telling me it was a farce and all these things. That's fine. It's easy to take pot shots from a keyboard. So I'm not too worried about that.
You bring up an interesting point. And I don't know if you've considered this, but I'd be really interested to see what your perspective is on this. Your expertise is work-life boundaries. How do you apply work-life boundaries to retirement?
Yeah, I think they change. I'll be clear. I think it's life boundaries. I don't separate work and life. Work
gotcha.
For me, priority-wise, is somewhere fourth, maybe fifth on my list. So I think what I do and what I've encouraged everybody to do is just sit down and define what you value. And I'm not talking like your house or, your stuff. Like, what are those things that are so dear to me? So if mine are my faith, my marriage, my relationship with my kids, my health, my finance, my relationships. So I then put boundaries around all of that. And I now have a pretty standard routine of when I work. I usually work from 8 to 8:30 to about 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, and then I'm done. Now, there's the occasional late night call that you have to take, or getting up early to get something done if you're going to leave on vacation, but those are rare. But it allows me to be in that time, be in that boundary. And then when I'm done, I'm done. So my wife and I are empty nesters. She gets a lot of my time. I get a lot of hers, which is awesome. I don't let a lot interfere with that. And so we plan around that. I have good friends here in my community, in my neighborhood. I make time for that. So retirement just means it changes. And retirement for me would be probably working like 2.5 days a week, doing research or flying somewhere to speak or volunteering, serving on a board, anything like that. So same thing. I would say, all right, that's a value that I have, my work, even though I'm in retirement. So I'm going to put a boundary around that. So when I'm working, I'm working. And when I'm out on the lake, I'm out on the lake. When I'm with my kids, hopefully someday grandchildren, that's my time. So I just establish those things as priorities in my life. And then I make the time so I can bring the best of myself to each of those areas. And so I think in retirement, it would just change. Right now, I'm working a full-time job. In retirement, I wouldn't. And it would be different if my children were still home and little, which I didn't do at that point. And when they're little, it would change when they were teenagers and more mobile. So I think every stage of life, you have to reevaluate, what boundaries do I need to set to get the best out of the life that I have.
Mm. And I know this is our fourth time trying to book a podcast appearance. We had thunderstorms, Wi-Fi issues, travel come up, and then realizing there was travel after someone had already been booked for us. But one thing I want to touch on, which I believe, if I remember correctly, we touched on a few months back when we were trying to record, was how you dealt with the struggles of addiction to kind of pass that phase of life and that season and overcome that, or at least learn to dance with it, to deal with it, to kind of get into the obviously very well refined kind of boundary of life that you've been able to set. And I admire it. I think it's very impressive that you're able to create those boundaries and actually stick to them with such a present way where, every person you're with, you have the boundaries of you're with them. You give them 100% of your attention. It's not, responding to a message, multitasking. It's you're with the person. So how did you kind of overcome that to get to the level that you're able to that you have now? Because I know a lot of people have those struggles, very successful people as well.
Yeah, and it's not easy. I have an amazing wife who helps me those boundaries, and we always have conversations about it. Even the most recent trip that I took in February, before I committed to it, I had to travel on her birthday. And, I always try to make a huge deal out of her birthday. If it was her way, she'd have the entire month set aside. But we had a conversation about, are you okay with this? And what does this look like, before I committed and said yes. So I don't want to paint a picture that I have this all figured out. I'm still a work in progress. Back to your core question, I think it's, one of the things I had to do was just admit that I really, and it sounds so cliche, but man, my life is out of whack. I've worked all so hard. I've made all these lies of why, for my family and all these things. I just had to come to terms that I had just become an ass. My ego was out of control, and I wasn't really concerned about anybody but me, which is a really humbling and hard place to get to. And I fought it for months. And through the grace of the Lord and a good number of friends who were like, hey, this is kind of who you are, I kind of just started at the bottom and said, I'm going to reject everything, every kind of facade that I have constructed. I'm going to painfully strip away, and I'm going to get back to who God created me to be. And that's where I will start. And then once I was able to get to that place, and I would say most days live in that place, it's still always a struggle because we all struggle with shame, is just say, all right, so what does that look like? So how should I now, because I'm who God created me to be at my core, what is my big why? And then what opportunities do I have to go and fulfill my purpose in my marriage, in my friendships, with my kids, with my clients, with my partners? It impacts every part of my life. And so really started back with getting just back to the roots of my faith and building from there. And it was a slow, sometimes painful process, but I look back now at almost 10 years at where I'm at, and I'm just in awe of the transformation and God's grace in my life. Can't thank him enough for it.
That's beautiful. And what you having been gone from being the aspiring speaker when you were in debate class in college, right? To then being the professional speaker, to then being the entrepreneur, that's a professional speaker too, that speaks to grow their business.
Yeah.
What knowledge would you share that you've learned on this journey with the aspiring speaker, professional speaker, or entrepreneur that speaks to grow their business that you have?
I would say two things is you can always get better. There are times when I am speaking and in the middle of it, you feel, they talk about flow state. I feel that sometimes when I'm speaking. If my wife's not there, I'll talk. She's the first one I always call as soon as I'm done. She'll say, how did it go? And I know I nailed it. And it's such a good feeling. And I think any of us, right, when we do something that we love, that we are trying to turn into anything of substance, when we really nail it, we know we did it. It's not this big-headed thing, but you just feel good that all your work paid off. But I always go back and say, I understand that I did great on this one. What areas could I improve? And not as a way to negate myself or to knock myself down, but even one of the last ones, and even here on this podcast, I've noticed a couple of times I've said the word I hate that. I hate the vocalized pauses. Maybe you'll edit it out. I don't know. But as I'm speaking, when I say that, I catalog that in the back of my brain to say, okay, you just used a vocalized pause. You need to work on that. Not as a way to beat myself up, but as a way to improve. So that's number one. Number two, don't take yourself so seriously. If you speak enough, things are going to happen that are way outside of your control. And understand that the sound people, the event coordinator, the hosts, they are all doing the best they can. And I remember one where the projector didn't work, something happened, my microphone went dead, and they were fumbling around, and people are sitting in the audience. So I finally said, you know what? Don't worry about it. I said, I can yell, I'll raise my voice. And I did the last 30 minutes of the presentation with no microphone, no slides behind me. And it turned into one of the better presentations I ever had because it was more real. And I started taking questions and I felt really connected to the audience. And so if I had gotten really wound up about all the things that didn't work, I would have lost that opportunity. So with each one, I try to laugh. I try to enjoy it. I think life's too short not to. And at the end of the day, there's always going to be somebody better than I am. So enjoy what I've got while I have it.
That's awesome. Now, where can someone who's listening here, and this is the last question I've got, where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn, as I said, just Carlos Hidalgo. You'll see me there. My email is on my profile, so carlos@digitalexhaust.co. I do have a Facebook profile, an Instagram profile, not as active. I'm also on X or Twitter, I guess we're calling it X these days, @CA Hidalgo. Mostly there you'll find some rantings about the New York Yankees. But other than that, I do try to share some other information. And whenever I'm on a podcast like this, I share it there as well.
Fantastic. Well, guys, if you're listening here and you're an aspiring speaker, a professional speaker, or an entrepreneur that speaks to grow their business, and you found what Carlos has just shared from his journey, you pulled one nugget of information out that you're going to take action on that will cause that impact in your speaking business or your life that you're looking for, please share this with a friend. That's the only way that the knowledge that Carlos and other speakers and business leaders and TEDx organizers that we have on here are able to actually find it, is just by you guys sharing it. There's no money behind it. It's just the value of the authentic conversations is how we're growing this. So Carlos, thank you for taking the time to be here. And guys, thank you for listening. Cheers, y'all.
Thanks, Ryan.